Hello there. Welcome to my weekly meditation. I am Reverend Devon, and if you are looking to nurture a progressive faith and are open to a second opinion, please know that no matter who you are or where you are in your life journey, you are welcome in this place. And so please also feel free to like and subscribe and share these messages with anybody you feel called to. The reading today comes from Mark chapter 1, verses 14 through 20. Now after John was arrested, Jesus came to Galilee, proclaiming the good news of God, and saying, "The time is fulfilled, and the kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe in the good news." As Jesus passed along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went a little further, he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, who were in their boat, mending the nets. Immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. Hello, sisters and brothers. Welcome to another weekly meditation here at Ascension. And today we are going through Mark chapter 1. And we're talking about Jesus recruiting his first disciples. And today I'd like to talk a little bit more about what it was his disciples, Simon, James, John, and Andrew, what it was they were gaining by choosing to leave their lives behind and follow Jesus. They were definitely taking a risk in choosing to follow this backwoods rabbi who was preaching a message that upended the social order. What did they hope to gain out of all of that? And why did they feel it was worth taking on the risk of following somebody like Jesus Christ? And so today, let's talk about how being a good person in the world and trying to follow in the example of Jesus does come with some risks attached to it. But also, let's talk about why following Jesus and being a good person in the world is worth taking on a little bit of risk. So, in our reading from Mark, we have the story of Jesus recruiting his first disciples. And he kind of walks into this fishing area around the Sea of Galilee, and he finds Simon, later known as Peter, and Simon's brother Andrew. And he says, "I'll make you fishers of people." And they're like, "Oh, well, that seems more interesting than what we're doing right here." And they follow Jesus. And then he finds James and his brother John, and he says, "Hey, follow me." And they literally jump off the boat where their dad's working with, the hired hands and fishing, kind of leaving their dad Zebedee like, "What's going on? Where are you going?" Which doesn't really explain to us why it is Jesus' first disciples would choose to give up everything that they had in order to follow a minister with a reputation like Jesus is. Jesus was known to not be on the right side of the ruling authorities in Israel, and he had a radical message. And I think that we do need to pay attention to the fact that Jesus' disciples were taking on a considerable amount of risk in choosing to leave their lives behind and to become Jesus' disciples. Why would James and John leave their dad and their fishing business to become the disciples of this backwoods preacher? Why would Peter and Andrew choose to listen to this guy who says, "I'll make you fishers of people"? When we are introduced to Jesus' first disciples, they had some measure of security within their lives. Fishing was not the best job that you could have in Israel at the time. You were kind of on the low end of the socio-economic ladder, but it could be worse. And in giving that up, Simon Peter, Andrew, James, and John were basically throwing their lives into the wind. What did they gain from doing that? Well, I think what Simon Peter, Andrew, James, and John were being offered was to be a part of a community and also to build a closer relationship with God through that community. That could be very attractive, and I think in a society such as Jesus's, community was very important. And I feel that maybe folks who have that sort of community identity is definitely present here in Vermont, especially if you're in small town Vermont. And I know that there are other places in America where community identity is very much valued, and people tend to think of themselves as a part of a whole. And there's a lot of comfort and value in that. I think that there are places here in the United States where we can build a basis of what it is Simon Peter, Andrew, James, and John were being drawn in on. But I also feel that here in the United States and in the world today, community identity is not valued quite as much as our individual identity is. And so it can be difficult to explain what exactly it is we can gain from being a part of a group that supports you and nurtures you and helps lift you up, or being a part of a movement that is trying to do something ambitious within the world. I think that the story that we have here, where Jesus is calling his first disciples, is a moment where these folks who did have some security in their lives were offered the opportunity to do something that maybe they never even considered they had the ability to do in their lives, and they chose to take on that risk. And I think that they chose to take on that risk because they're good people and they wanted to see the world become a better place. And they felt that by joining this community of Christ, they could make the world a better place. It was a risk worth taking for them. This last Monday was Martin Luther King Day, and I think about the civil rights movement often when I think about Jesus and his movement that led to his death on the cross when he went to Jerusalem. I think that there are a lot of comparisons there, and in particular, I think about the people who lost their lives in both movements. There were a lot of folks during the civil rights era, people who were black and people who were white, who went down south and they advocated for racial equality and civil rights. And they were murdered by people who were enthralled in racism and hate. But they were willing to risk their lives, and in many cases give their lives, because they felt that they could do something to make the world more loving, more fair, more equitable for all people. Both in Jesus' movement and in the civil rights movement, we saw leaders who were supported by a community of people, not just followers, who walked with them and shared the same risks with them. And I also think supported them in doing the things that they needed to do in order to make the world pay attention to that message of love that they were sharing. This last Monday, I read through Dr. King's final speech where he talked about being on the mountaintop and seeing the promised land. And in the video recording of that speech, you can see him tearing up. You can see him visibly moved as he talks about how he might not live to see that promised land, but he got to stand on the mountaintop. He got to contribute. And many people believe that he knew his death was coming, but still he chose to be a part of that movement, to move forward with the message, even knowing the risks that were involved with it. Keep in mind that Dr. King had already survived a assassination attempt where he was stabbed in the chest and recovered. And so he knew the risks that came involved with being a part of the civil rights movement. But I also think he was supported moving forward with that movement by a community of people who believed, as he did, that they could make the world better. and were willing to take the exact same risks and make the same sacrifices that he ultimately did as well. Jesus also had a community like that, a community of people who were going around Israel and speaking out against the corruption of the Roman authority in the temple. They were being persecuted by those authorities. They were losing their lives to that authority. And I think that when you have a community that is willing to support you and guide you and be an example to you, it gives you a strength to do things you probably never imagined being able to do on your own as an individual. And so, what I think we're seeing here in this passage from Mark is not Jesus using superpowers or any form of manipulation to draw in Simon Peter, Andrew, James, or John. He's just happens to share a passion with them, a desire to see the world be a better place. And so these disciples were willing to share their lives with Jesus in order to gain a life that had meaning, had love, community, and also brought them in connection with God. I think it's worth noting that almost all of Jesus' disciples ended up getting executed by the authorities at some point or other. Not all of them did, but most of them did. And all of them felt that following Jesus was worth it. We in the world today are going to be confronted with opportunities where we can do the right thing. But sometimes doing the right thing puts us in opposition to forces that are not concerned about communities or us as a group. It's not concerned about people who are struggling with homelessness or addiction, poverty. It's not concerned with people who are trying to recover from flood damages here in Vermont. They're concerned about building houses. They're concerned about being able to cash in a paycheck. And that's just a reality of this imperfect world that we live in. And sometimes, if you stand up against those forces, you're going to pay a price. And that price, as we saw in the Jesus movement and the civil rights movement, sometimes can be your life. And we need to ask ourselves, is doing the right thing that important to us? Is following Jesus so important to us that we're willing to give up everything? Doesn't mean you're a bad person if you're not willing to go as far as Jesus' disciples did or as people in the civil rights movement did. I think a lot of the people who gave up their lives in both cases didn't know that they were walking into a situation where that would happen. But I also think that a lot of them understood that there was a possibility. And still they were willing to take on that risk. It's a hard situation to be in, and I think that while I myself have never been in a situation where I knew, as Dr. King did, that your life was probably going to be lost, I definitely have stepped into situations where I was afraid of the possibility, and it's hard to take those steps forward because fear of loss, this is a Yoda quote, fear of loss sometimes can lead to the dark side. But still we are called to follow Jesus, despite the risk of it all, because we are told that we can be a part of a movement that will eventually create a better world for us all. And that ultimately is the goal of what Christianity is supposed to be about. That's what church is supposed to be about. It's part of the reason why it played such a large role in the civil rights movement. It's part of the reason why Christianity continues to be a big part within the African American community. It's because within that structure of belief is the promise that we as a community, as small parts of a greater whole, can do things that we never imagined doing on our own. If we stand together, we can change the world. Amen.